Let's ride. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Moto Mission Adventure Podcast. We're telling stories of adventure and talking to people with adventurous lives. This guest, his name is Chris Hytha, and Chris is someone I met out in Utah a few years ago. He was riding his bicycle across the country. Yeah, from coast to coast on his bicycle. And so we got to hang out and we developed a friendship. His thoughts on adventure are quite fascinating. And so you're going to hear from Chris today. He's an incredible artist. He's a photographer. He's been published in National Geographic and all sorts of fun things. So let's talk to Chris. Chris, welcome, buddy. How are you?
Hey, Brock, doing great. Yeah, I'm excited to relive some of these experiences. Like 3 years ago, now 2020 was that bike trip. Happy to get into it.
I am so excited to tell some of the story. So I've been telling stories about when I met you for years. It was such a fascinating, serendipitous moment. Let's just jump right in. I was in the van with my motorcycle strapped to the back, as I normally do for people who watch my YouTube channel. And Ani was with me, my wife, and we pull over on the side of the road to find a place to boondock camp. And we saw I think it was four of you guys on bicycles, but I think two of you first
Yep.
showed up next to our van to pitch a tent on the ground. And we were like, where are you guys coming from?
Yeah, because that was you must remember driving up that mountain. It was a whole mountain pass. So we had been biking up that hill for quite a while when we ran into you.
Yeah, we had actually passed you earlier that day, not knowing we would actually see you later and then camp next to you. So we were on the top of a mountain at Grand Staircase Escalante in Utah. Beautiful, beautiful place with incredible views and aspen trees and lots of cows in the middle of the road. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah. The cows had I think it was like NO for like number and then a number, but we were biking up the road and this giant cow was in the middle and it just said no on the side of it. And we were like, can we pass? Do you mind? And it was with its family looking at us and we were just waiting for a long time. Cause I don't know, like I feel like a male cow could be kind of aggressive, but yeah, lots of cows. I remember too, that ride was I think maybe the most beautiful of the trip, most beautiful of Utah. It was wild how much the scenery changed going through the Grand Staircase National Park, whatever it was, crazy rock formations.
Yeah.
There were like some purple rocks. And then by
Yep.
the end of the day, it felt like California, like almost the Sierra Nevadas when you're going up into that mountain pass. So it was like the craziest geological experience in just maybe it was 50 or 60 miles we did that day.
Well, that's how we met. But I think what's more fascinating is when I said, I say, hey, where are you guys riding from? And we're in Utah at that moment. I said, where are you guys riding
Yeah.
from? And your answer was
PA, yeah, we left from right outside of Philadelphia, and it was more relieving to tell you that out in Utah. We actually had someone on our very first morning in Phoenixville, where we grew up. Another cyclist was biking. It was like 5 a.m. We're just setting off on this adventure, not sure what's gonna happen. And he sees our bikes packed up. So he's like, where are you guys headed? We're like, San Francisco, baby. And he just started yelling, San Fran. But at that point, it was like, are we gonna make it there? I don't know. Once we got to Utah, we're like, it's fine. We settled into the lifestyle.
so you rode a bicycle from Philadelphia to San Francisco. How long did it actually take you?
Total was 84 days, which is about what we expected. I think we ended up doing like 7 days extra. We gave ourselves we called them fun days because we realized that when you're on the road, like you never know who you're gonna meet. You never know what kind of opportunities or adventures might confront you. So every once in a while, we'd like run into some crazy people and look at each other and be like, let's just hang out here all day tomorrow. We don't need a bike. What's the rush? So in so many regions, like specifically, I remember in Kentucky, we had a great fun day with these awesome folks in oh, I forget the town name. They're gonna hate me. Somewhere in Kentucky. They're nice
Yeah.
folks.
Well, I tell you, one of those days was, well, when we met, we ended up the next day, we ended up at the same like
Yeah,
restaurant
yeah, yeah.
for lunch. Maybe it was a little earlier, but we ended up spending most of the day hanging out at this little coffee shop in Boulder, Utah.
Yeah.
I don't know how many miles it was from where we previous met the previous day, but we're hanging out at this coffee shop and you guys start telling me stories and I'm fascinated by your stories at this point.
Uh-huh.
You were on day like 60 or 70 or something. And I was like, wait, what? And you had
Hmm.
met so many fascinating people. I want a couple stories. One, I'm actually curious. We were having a great time eating food and chilling, and you got a phone call from your credit card company, and your
Oh, it was
face
a bad
changed
day.
really fast. Tell us that story and what happened.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So largely we experienced such generosity and positivity from people. That was the takeaway. So don't let this story tarnish the image of folks out in Utah. But we had rented ATVs and like a dune buggy thing to go out into the desert in I forget what town it was. We had just passed through it, and it was a great time. But like right when we got out, our side by side broke down, and we were in the middle of the desert at like 11 a.m. It was about to be the heat of the day. We are like, this could be kind of bad. So we like let it cool down. Eventually, we get it started again, and we keep going. And we keep going out, which was probably irresponsible. We should have turned around when this thing was unreliable. Uh, we got to the top of this mountain. It died again. Finally, got it back, and then it died once more and wouldn't start again. Getting back to town, so we had to call the guy who rented it to us, and he shows up, and there were just like empty cigarette boxes and Bud Lights in the back of his car. He didn't say much, and we were just like, "Hey, man, this thing just died. Like, we didn't do anything to it." He was real quiet. I get back, my tire's flat, so my friends just go to the campsite without me. I'm fixing my tire. I'm like, did this guy like put a hole in my tire? I don't know what happened. Then I bike to the wrong campsite, and it's like super hot, super dusty, super windy. I'm exhausted. I'm like a little anxious about this situation because I kind of had a hunch like this guy's gonna try to blame us for this thing. And my tire's flat. I didn't actually fix it. I was pumping it up. Went to the wrong campsite. Tire's flat again. I'm pumping it up in the wind. Just bad day. And then the next day I was with you, had this bad feeling, checked my credit card, and I got charged like $2,000, $2,000. He tried to charge it for $5,000 and it didn't go through. My friend Jake, whose ATV didn't even break down, got charged $2,000. Like he
Oh
was just
no.
charging our cards as much as he could. But luckily the credit card company like just marked it as fraud and it wasn't a
Hmm.
problem. But yeah, my face definitely changed. My heart dropped in that moment.
There was a story you told me about riding across, I'm going to say, I think it was Kansas, and it was the heat of the day. And there was a thing that you guys would do to kind of wait out the heat of the day. And on one occasion, I don't know if you'll remember this, surely you will, but you ended up in a Walmart.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
there's a dog food story in there somewhere, right? Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
of course. I actually just reread that story to my girlfriend because I wrote a whole blog for this adventure because I wanted to remember the stories in detail too. So I had just reread that, so it's kind of fresh in my memory. That was hilarious though. Yeah, in Kansas, by the time it's like 10, 11 a.m., it's too hot to bike. It's like 100 degrees and super humid, and there's no shade. So we would wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m., bike until 9, latest 10. And then it's like, just hope that we find a shady spot. Just hope you can get inside to some air conditioning. So we would like lay on the ground in gas stations and try to just try to be in the air conditioning. It was so nice. So we stopped at this Walmart for lunch, and we got some sandwich stuff. We make some sandwiches out back, like next to the loading dock. And and then we're like, well, we're finished our lunch. I guess we should, I don't know, go into town, try to find something. And then I think it was probably Jake. He has a lot of bad ideas. He was like, what if we just find a spot in the Walmart? I mean, it's a big store. I mean, they got a lot of square footage in there. All I need is what, 5 square feet? to lay my measly head. You can find that. So we're walking around the aisles trying to find a place that we could just hide for a little bit, maybe take a nap. And we found that the dog food aisle, they had these like reinforced shelves. So we were all in the dog food aisle, like acting like we were checking the ingredients or something for the dog food, and slowly pulling all the bags out from the back and building like a wall in the front. And then we would check that the coast clear. And like first Jake jumps in, he pulls the bags back on top, so he's in a little cave. And one by one, we all just we were texting the whole time. We're like, "Yo, are we all in the dog house?" But for me, I didn't have a spotter, so all my friends were in the dog food, and I just had to kind of like look left, look right, and dive in. And it was a hilarious feeling to like look through the crack and see people on like the motorized scooters riding by. So we were in there for a good like 5 hours, 6 hours. At one point I got out and got Subway, and then I like slipped a Subway sandwich like through the crack of the dog food, threw one up onto the shelf where my buddy was. And then the climax of that story, and we actually like got some sleep. It wasn't just a goof. It was like the plan worked well. So we all get out, and then my friend Jason's trying to get out. We're like, coast isn't clear. These college kids came to restock the dog food. So they had a big cart full of it. And he survives one restocking. They leave, but then he's late shopping. And then he's behind the Beneful dog food. And these college kids come back with a cart loaded up with the Beneful. And we're like, yo, Jason, bad news. So I'm just watching from the one side of the aisle. And one kid peeks his head over the shelf because he's going to load the bag up there. And he's like, is that a leg? His friend just said, what? And he peeks up and just looks my friend in the eyes, and there's like a palpable silence, and neither knows what to say. And then Jason's just like, I'll leave. So he climbs down, we skedaddle out, and then he forgets his phone in the dog food, so he goes back to get it and chats with these guys. And they tell him, he tells them the whole situation, like why we were up there, what we're doing. And they said, oh, you could go back in there if you want. Like, we won't tell. But we had to get on the road anyway. So it was just a great end to that story.
Oh my gosh. My face hurts. I'm laughing so hard from that crazy story because I'm just picturing it, I can literally picture these guys like they're stocking the shelves and like, whoa, is that a leg?
Yeah, they had never seen something like that.
Oh, you're killing me. I thought that I had remembered that story right, but it's been a few years, and I was like, I have to get you to tell it. And gosh, it was just as funny as I remember.
Yeah, that's a highlight for sure.
You told me a story about meeting a guy on a bicycle, and I don't remember a lot of the details, but do you know what I'm talking about? You met a guy on a bicycle that he was like on Wall Street or some like high like securities or broker or something. Do you
remember? I don't remember his day job, but the story is my friend Jake and John decided, they called it the Keiko Buck 80.
There were four of you. There were four of you on this trip.
Yeah, so it was I think it might have been Jake's birthday or something. He just wanted to push it, and he wanted to finish out Kansas in a day. We were about halfway through Kansas, and every lunchtime we'd look at the maps, and it was always Jake or John. They would be like, oh, if we just keep pushing, we could get all the way to here. We could get to Colorado. And we're like, dude, that's 180 miles away. I don't want to do that. So me and Jason did 100 miles, and we just found a park to camp in. And John and Jake did 180 miles in a day through Kansas. We got a good tailwind. So they get to the Kansas border just delirious. They set up their tents under the colorful Colorado state sign.
Yeah.
And then John was like beaten down. He didn't put his rain fly on. It rained that night. He woke up in a puddle and was just like shivering and had a cold. So he biked to the next town and got a motel and dealt with it. But so then Jake was just alone at the state sign. And this guy, he's sleeping, and he just hears like the pedaling and hears someone coming up to his tent. So he peeks his head out. and it's this old dude. He's like maybe 65. He has a dog poking out one of his panniers, and I just heard this from Jake, but we get a text. We're working our way to the Colorado border. And we get a text, and Jake's like, yeah, this dude just showed up. We're talking mad conspiracies. And he was just telling us about how he was going off about giants in Antarctica and like crazy stuff. So finally we show up and this guy's still there. And he was such a mysterious character. He had an atlas. His name was Paul. He had an atlas that had like just so many crossings documenting all his journeys. He had been back and forth across the country like 5, 7 times. He had been on the road for over 5 years. And he told us this crazy story about how he needed to get a tent at REI, and he shows up and he's like, hey, I need to get this tent. And she was like, oh yeah, we don't have them in stock. We're going to ship them. So we can ship it to you. Like, what's your home address? He's like, oh, ma'am, I don't have a home address. She's like, okay, well, just give me your phone number and I'll give you a call when we get it stocked here. He's like, oh, ma'am, I don't have a phone. I threw it in the river. And she's like, okay, an email address? He's like, I don't got it. So this guy's just off the grid. I don't know how he eventually got a tent, but he was just sick, I guess, of modern society. He was annoyed that his phone like would buzz or whatever and threw it in the river. So I wonder where he's at now. He's probably still biking around, I guess.
Oh man, I can't even, I don't, that's crazy. I can't imagine like his life and how he did it. But there was one thing that it might've been Jake that said that quoted this guy. And I have quoted this so many times since we had this conversation. Because if I remember correctly, you guys asked him like, how do you plan to do this? Like he doesn't have a phone. He doesn't have like really anything. He's just riding around on a bike. And it's like, how do you survive? How do you plan this? And I remember, I might mess this quote up, but this is how I've quoted it for years. I remember the guy told you, most people plan it and then do it. I say do it and then plan it. And at first you kind of go, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then you go, oh, I get it. Because like I've ridden across the country more than once and we've driven it, in various ways and motorcycle and different things. And if you were to say, here's how we're going to do it, we're going to plan to go here, 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 and like have logistics like squared away, it would be so daunting and the plan wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But if you just do it and kind of plan as you go, then it works. And that's where a lot of people get hung up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you need to be kind of light on your feet, and it's really more of like you don't plan the trip, you kind of plan for the mindset. Like you get yourself all the tools you need. If you're confident that you're like a good problem solver, if you're not going to get too caught up in like the emotions of getting a flat tire or having some type of issue, if you can just like think clearly, think about the goal, and just do what you need to do to keep making your way west, it can work out. And before we go off on kind of the philosophical side of adventuring, I just remembered another insight that this guy told us. He said, we're headed west. He said, beware of green grass. It's going to be tempting. You're going to want to set up your tent. You're going to want to just lay down in this beautiful, beautiful swath of green in these deserts. Don't do it, because where there's grass, there's sprinklers always. So this was in the back of our head.
Gosh, you
And
only
then
know that from experience, right?
yeah, so we it was so funny. We were in Colorado, Gunner, Colorado, I believe it was. And we were right in town. And when we were in towns, we would try to camp in a park. We would call police stations to camp out back there if they'd let us, wherever we could. And we found a nice baseball field and there was a dugout, and it was like, oh, no one's here. Like we could totally set up here for the night. And the field was green. And we had a conversation about it. And we remembered what he said. And we were like, there might be sprinklers here. And we were like, no, they probably water it with a hose. It'll be fine. So we all, and every single night you're exhausted after biking, through the heat of the summer. It was probably 10 p.m. We woke up these sprinkler heads came out. One was under Jake's tent, and one was right next to my head. So you kind of hear this like, and then, and you're just getting drenched, and you're like, oh no. And all your stuff is unpacked in your tent. My sleeping bag's unrolled, like, and we're getting blasted. So we kind of wait for the sprinkler to go out into the field, and then both Jake and I jump out of our tents, grab the whole tent, and run away. Um, Somehow John and Jason, they weren't close enough to the sprinklers to bother them, but we were getting drenched. So so we run to this pavilion, and it's like late at night, it's dark, we're exhausted, and we're just looking at each other like, what do we do now, man? Like everything's wet, sleeping bag's wet, I'm cold, the tent's wet. Like, and I think that was just it was just a long night after that.
I guess so. That's the memories though, man. You only learn that kind of stuff from experience, because that sounds like such random advice. So random.
Yeah.
But then once you experience it, you're like, I
Yeah.
get it.
Well, and I'm sure Paul had that exact same experience of getting everything drenched and having a bad night.
Yeah.
And he wanted to save us from that sorrow, but we didn't heed his advice and we paid for it.
Oh, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. That really cracks me up. Have you have you always been so adventurous?
Yeah, well, it started with climbing. I got really into, like, through high school, we would climb trees and stuff, and then it turned into climbing water towers. And then it
Yeah.
turned into climbing like anything that we could. At one point, we climbed a cell tower, which was probably a little reckless, like one of the white and red
Yep.
section, like the guy wires, like a
Yep.
1,000 foot tower. I only made it halfway up because you start to feel the wobble, gets a little freaky. But yeah, the biking started freshman, or sorry, it was senior year of high school. I had a biology class with Jake, and we have been great friends since the start of middle school, and we had always kind of pushed each other to just try to do crazier and crazier things as kids do. And we kind of, well, we started biking to Philly from our hometown. It's like a 50-mile round trip ride, and that was the first thing. And it was like, could we bike to Philly? That'd be crazy. Like, I've never been able to do that. So we do that, and then we biked to the ocean. How far east could we bike? And we biked to Ocean City, and that was a whole other story. We got caught in a hurricane, learned a lot of lessons there. Um, and then we were in this biology class together. We just didn't like that class, I guess. And we had a friend that was doing all our labs for us. So we would just Google Maps the route to Florida through that whole class. We would put it on bike mode, type in Phoenixville to Florida, and we would just like track through it. And we're like, we could do it. It's just a road. You just have to ride down it, right? And then like there were a couple sections that got a little hairy, but we kind of were joking about it at first. We would play a lot of ping pong, and we would just kind of like escalate the conversations. Like, what if we bike to Philly? What if we bike to Chicago? How about we just,
Yeah.
what if we go to Florida? And eventually we it was a joke, but we planned it enough that it was kind of real, and we were like, oh, we could probably do this. So we were still 17. It was the day after we graduated. So we had our ceremony. Jake stayed over at my parents' house. And then the next morning, we just like took off on a new adventure.
How'd that go?
Yeah, I told you earlier, there was this experience that honestly like shaped the future adventures I would have. Because if I bailed out on this, I probably wouldn't have the courage to do greater things. So it was the second day. We just camped we camped next to a train track, which sucked. There were trains like every 2 hours, and they would
Genius.
wake you up. Yeah, you learn a lot about like where you should camp, and stealth camping is like a whole art that we perfected over the 84 nights spent out
I'm
in the
sure.
wilderness. We roll our bikes down. It's like 4 a.m. We're getting an early start, and I must have rolled it over something because a mile down the road I got a flat. So we pulled over at a Wawa. I had never even changed a bike tire. Like I wasn't a cyclist. I didn't know what I was doing. So I had a spare tube, had never changed it. I take my tire off, put the tube in, and I can't get my tire back on. Like the bead is just too tight. And I think I had those little pry tools, and
Right.
I just couldn't do it. So I borrowed Jake's bike and I went to Walmart, and I thought maybe I have the wrong tube size. So I bike 2 miles. Well, it was like a mile down the road, a mile back. Grab another tube. That doesn't work. And then, and I still can't get the tire on. So then I bike back to Walmart and I look for new tires because I can't get this tire on. Bike back. So then I'm already 4 miles into the day
Right.
and I haven't gone anywhere. And that didn't work either. It was Sunday, so no bike shops were open. And at one point, Jake just got frustrated because we'd been at this Wawa for like 3-4 hours trying to figure this out. And it's so stupid. This sounds like such a stupid kid thing, like in over our heads. I'd never changed a bike. And you start to get those bad thoughts of like, I can't do this. Like, what am I thinking? This is second day and I can't change a flat. Like, how could I possibly make it another 2 weeks on the road? So Jake bikes off in frustration. He just starts going towards Washington, D.C. And I start biking. I just, without the bead on the tire, I bike. And the friction of my wheel moving, it's just rubbing on the frame of my bike. And eventually
Right.
it just locks up. And even when I was pedaling, there was so much friction, but I was just like, I just want to go. I just want to, get on with this. And in a feat of desperation, I just got my knife and cut the bead of the tire, which I had no clue if the tire would even work after that point. So I cut the bead and then I could slip it over, and then it just worked. That bead cut tire lasted me 500 miles, and yeah, I was still close enough that my parents could have picked me up. I could have bailed. Jake like left because he was frustrated. So if it wasn't for that moment and it wasn't for just the idea to cut it as a last stitch effort, I feel like I would have been a little beaten down, and I don't think I'd have the spirit to keep going.
Well, it sounds like you learned like don't give up, like the grit part of adventure. That's a real part of adventure is grit.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like you were at 17 years old, like learning, okay, we're doing
Yeah.
this. I'm not giving up. If you would have given up, that would have changed so much about your life. I feel like,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
not just you, I think everybody.
Yeah, and there's also an element of telling people about what you're doing that's kind of interesting to me because it kind of holds you accountable. And
Sure.
it's almost like I would rather just walk to Florida. I'd rather just get to Florida however I can than go back home. And every, friends and family and
Yeah,
whoever
dude.
would be like, "Oh, you said you're biking to Florida,
Yeah.
right? How did that?"
Yeah.
And then have to tell them I bailed
I
after
didn't
the
get out of the
first day.
neighborhood.
I couldn't handle that, Brock. I
Yeah,
couldn't
no,
handle
that's
that.
good. That's
And there
good.
was another moment too where so it lasted 500 miles, and then I started getting flat after flat. I got like 6 flats in one day. I don't know what happened, but I was thinking about buying a new bike at Walmart. I was like in the bike aisle, just like, I want to get rid of this piece of crap. Also, the bikes we had, I bought my bike used for $200 at the bike shop. It was a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
Since has been stolen in Philly.
Oh
Which
no.
was sad to see it go, but in better hands now, maybe.
Wow. What is I want to ask like what's the biggest lesson you've learned, but it almost sounds like that was it. Is there some other lesson like takeaway, life takeaway? Because that was in the early part of your adventure career, as I air quote here. But you've done a lot more, there's many more nights on the road. What's the biggest life lesson you've taken away from your
Yeah,
adventure?
I think that, and definitely I is internalized and I live by today. Kind of just the idea that you can accomplish big goals in little chunks. And I think that adventure, especially biking, like when you have it in your head, it's just like one pedal after the other. Um, and it seems so daunting, like being here in PA, like going all the way to San Francisco, it's such a monumental task. But you realize, and I had the experience of just day after day, just work towards that goal. Like eventually you're going to get there. So I definitely apply that to business and my like art career and kind of everything I do. Big tasks and big goals don't seem so daunting because you realize it's just like, just break it up, chunk it down, and move towards your goal.
Speaking of big goals, I'm assuming this was part of your goal when you were riding across America when I met you, but was to take photography, do some incredible pictures. I remember you carrying around a big, huge, lens,
Yeah.
big weighty lens, but you were like, it's worth it, man. Look what I can get out of this. And I remember
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
editing photos, and then after all of this, I began to watch your Instagram account and pictures that you were posting and stuff you got back home with all the architecture and urban landscape type stuff. And I'll let you define that, but that stuff has really taken off. And I want to hear about like some of those successes that you have had with all of your
Mhm.
incredible photography.
Yeah, thanks, man. And before we get into that, though, I want to talk about that lens because that was a really interesting experience for me. I just so I brought a couple lenses and I had my DSLR camera, which is really heavy. And when you're bike packing, it's like every pound counts. And I orchestrated this very scary plan where I was going to order a lens because I was going into the mountains and I had seen images on Instagram and stuff of like long telephoto lenses. You get the compression and you can be like way on another ridge and get a shot of someone. And I just thought that was super cool, wanted to experiment with it. So I ordered a lens on Amazon and had it shipped to this tiny post office. And I like planned it ahead, like, okay, it'll ship in 5 days and we're going to make this much distance each day. And I got to be at this point at this time to get the lens. And and I showed up, and lo and behold, they had a package for me. And I just packed up my other lens, shipped that back, and now I had this massive lens. I have it here. It's like this thing is huge. It weighs like probably 4 pounds or something, 5 pounds on its own. Pretty much
What
took
and
up like
describe that lens? How what's the zoom on it? What's
yeah,
the
I think it's a 150 to 600 Tamron lens, so
yeah.
super telephoto, and just like reckless to bring something like that on a bike trip, especially like I wanted it for the photos in the mountains, but remember we have to get through the Rocky Mountains, like how much elevation gain that is and how much weight I'm adding to my bike.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was just excited about it. And then I kind of didn't really use it much. I wasn't really happy with anything I got, and I really was feeling like it was a mistake. And then there was one day in Nevada, we were going down this valley road, and it was super hot. It was already like 10 a.m. maybe. And Nevada's a trip. Like we would see like cow skeletons. We probably saw 5 dead cows, 6 dead cows that would get lost from the herd, run out of water. So like you're just in this land of death. And there's 30 miles, 40 miles between towns, really hostile landscape, no shade. And, I kind of just want to get done with the day. Like it's hard enough just to bike, let alone to like have some creative energy. So I was very close to not taking the shot, but I was like, okay, I want to get this. I stopped one of my friends, got this lens, got in the middle of the street and told him to bike. And I have some of these publications to show you, but it ended up being like one of my most popular photos on Instagram. Looks like one of these Inception images where you like stitch together drone images.
Yeah,
A lot of people thought it was
doesn't look
Photoshop.
real. So what we're
Yeah,
looking at is the cover of Adventure Cyclist, and this is actually on your Instagram page also.
pinned at
This
the top.
photo, and it does not look real. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's because of the compression, the super long lens, and I'm looking down at
Uh-huh.
this valley, and the road's dead straight, and it just runs up another mountain in the distance. Um, and it was just crazy that I was so close to not taking this
Yeah.
image. I knew it'd be cool, but again, I just didn't want to stop. And it was pretty much immediate. Like I took the photos, got to the next town, and shared them on Instagram on my story before I even posted it. And like even just on my story, people were like, "Whoa, what?" And then I posted it, and it blew up. And then to like get it on the cover of Adventure Cycling was crazy. And I also have this Nat Geo 100 Rides to Remember book. Uh,
National Geographic book, and it has 100 rides to remember, Transamerica Trail, and I see that same photo, and this is you. They've published your photo.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really cool because this book is kind of cataloging a variety of different bike routes across the country, the Trans-American Trail being one of them. And out of, all the people that have biked the Trans-America Trail, it's a very, published route and traveled route. It's just quite an honor to have some of the photos from our trip in this book.
Dude, congratulations, man. It's
Thank you.
well deserved also. I'm a huge fan of what you've done, following you on Instagram, and you've got all sorts of, even photography and things that you're selling and different things. But now I'm even seeing like sculptures or 3D models of, I mean, it's just fascinating what you're
Yeah.
doing. You're very creative guys. And I'm very glad that you took the time to take that lens, because it's done really well for you.
Mhm. Yeah, we could get into some of the other non-adventure stuff, more the art stuff, just briefly. I know that's not what this
Yeah, sure.
podcast is all about. But yeah, I went to architecture school. So before this bike trip, my focus was always on buildings. The adventure too. I got really into the urbex scene. That was how I started photography. I would try to get on rooftops. I would climb like cranes, and just do, hooligan stuff, go to abandoned buildings. And then I realized I like just doing photography on the street and coming up with unique images there was actually more of a challenge than just finding a cool place, having to have a cool place to have a cool photo. So I got into photography that way. But I went to architecture school, so I got done the bike trip, finished out my final year of school, and then I kind of shifted my focus into doing like more cohesive projects. And this, I mean, this is kind of in parallel with the takeaway from the bike trip of like accomplishing a bigger goal step by step. I was kind of like burnt out on just going into the city and taking random photos. I would just bike around and like find cool light, find cool images. And I just wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do like collections of images. So I did one series on Philadelphia row homes that was kind of like an analysis of this building typology, and they're all the same, they're all consistent, they're all kind of the same width, same height, but within that you kind of see like life unfolding. You see how people have modified them over time, you see how people have painted them different colors, changed things. Like there's just a fascinating variety. And then from that I started doing art deco skyscrapers, and this is like 2 years in the making now, and it's just finished. I have a book coming out for that too, that you can pre-order on my site. It'll be done hopefully by like November 15th. They should be done production. But it's like I've documented Art Deco skyscrapers in nearly every city. I think in the project now it's like 60 different cities across the country, around 200 buildings. So that's very much like a daunting task, like setting off on that. If I hadn't had this adventure experience and this experience of accomplishing big goals step by step, I probably wouldn't embark on something like this. But immensely proud of it now, after 2 years of work and a whole lot of travel and a whole lot of logistics to get my drone license. I take the images with the drone and tons of hours of editing. It's really come together.
That's great. Congrats. It's fantastic work. I hope that everybody goes and takes a look, and give us your website. Where can we find you?
Yeah, it's hythacg.com. It's hythacg.com. And that's the same for Instagram. It's hytha.cg, and Twitter too, hythacg. That's just my last name and first two initials. It was like my school login, like from elementary school on. They use the last name, first initials. So
Yeah.
it just stuck. And CG, my initials though, kind of are like computer generated, like
Yeah.
CG graphics. I use Photoshop, kind of works.
Sure. Well, that's great. I'm definitely going to check it out. I've just loved looking at the stuff that I've seen online, and you're just amazing. I mean, and I'm not just saying that, like your work, and I comment on your stuff. I send you messages. I'm like, dude, that was fantastic. And so, dude, I'm just so stoked that we met on a random mountaintop on the side of the road.
Yeah, man. And it's great that has continued to today, and to be able to stay in touch with you. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And I have a blog too on my website. One of the tabs is like bike blog, and I have all these stories cataloged. If you go to Kansas, I think it's part 5. Every week it was like 9 sections, 9 weeks roughly. You can find that dog food story, and there's some funny like gifs that I put in there of like my friends crawling out of the dog food, and screenshots of the text we were sending each other. So it's a good read. You want to check that out.
I'm gonna go look at that right away. Well, man, it was good talking to you. So thankful that you hopped on and did this podcast with me, and hopefully everybody liked it. Please, we want to hear from you guys, all of you that are listening, watching. Please, comment, send us messages. We kind of want to hear what you think about all this, and what do you think about what Chris was telling, these crazy stories. Chris Hytha, you were awesome to talk to today, so thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and there's a lot more adventure coming.